Today, we are wrestling with something really fundamental. It feels like a moment where a foundational pillar in the history of computing has just crumbled.
That's a good way to put it.
We are living in a moment where the most famous, the gold standard benchmark for machine consciousness, the Turing test, has been fundamentally, and I mean fundamentally, broken.
It really is a seismic shift. For decades, the Turing test, or the TT, was the North Star for AI researchers. It was the measure of success.
And the premise was so simple, so elegant.
Deceptively simple. If a computer could fool at least 30% of human judges into believing they were chatting with another person just over text,
Then it was considered capable of thought. That was the bar.
it seemed like a really high bar for a long, long time.
For 50 years, absolutely. But then, of course, the era of massive language modeling arrived. Systems like ChatGPT, and now its successors, like GPT 4.5, they haven't just crept up to that 30% threshold.
No, they've completely obliterated it.
Exactly. We now have confirmed data that these large language models, LLMs, they don't just pass the test. They routinely pass it, and in some cases, they actually outperform humans in these interactions.
And then it changes the whole game. When the old measure of intelligence fails so spectacularly, the entire world just scrambles for a new one. And that's the sort of chaotic intellectual search we're in right now.
Right.
So in this deep dive, we're going to analyze the sources that outline this desperate hunt for a replacement benchmark.
Right.
We're talking about tests that demand real common sense or robust reasoning,
Right.
and this is the really controversial one, tests that equate intelligence with just compressing human knowledge.
And this isn't just some, academic exercise to find a better yardstick. The failure of the Turing test is accelerating a huge high-stakes debate about AI governance.
It really is.
The policy decisions we're making right now, they all hinge on this one question. Is AI a normal technology, gradual, manageable, with risks we can handle, or is it a fast-approaching existential threat? Superintelligence.
And those two frameworks, AI as a normal, if disruptive technology, versus AI as a potential world-ending force, they demand completely different, often contradictory policy interventions.
That's our mission today.
Exactly. To distill these technical, philosophical, and governance challenges for you, we'll analyze the competing viewpoints on safety and diffusion, and really try to identify the most critical takeaways for you, the informed learner, as you try to navigate this landscape.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the specifics. How exactly did these conversational agents manage to break the tests that defined AI for decades?
Well, the defeat of the Turing test is, at its core, a triumph of machine learning techniques focused on mimicry, deceptive fluency.
So it's not about thinking, it's about sounding like you're thinking.
Precisely. And crucially, the outcome often depends heavily on what we call prompt engineering. You're basically giving the machine an explicit strategy for how to deceive someone.
Let's get into the specifics of that. I saw some of the data, and it's startling. Researchers set up a study with GPT 4.5.
Right.
And when they gave it a very specific instruction set, a persona prompt, basically telling it to act like a young, culture-savvy person, the results were, well, they were shocking. The model was judged to be human 73% of the time.
And that 73% figure is the critical part. You have to understand what that means. In that specific experiment, the machine was judged as human more often than the actual humans who were participating.
Wait, really? More often than the real people?
Yes. The humans, under the pressure of the test, often struggled to seem normal. They'd overthink their answers. The machine, on the other hand, when it was constrained by that persona, just became a superior textual mimic. It was better at pretending to be a normal person than an actual normal person was.
And that persona detail is everything, isn't it? It's not a minor footnote. It shows the mechanism of success.
Absolutely. Because if the prompt was basic, just try to convince the judges you're human, without any specific role to play, the win rate just plummeted.
Down to what?
A mere 36%. The persona, that instruction set, it provided the scaffolding. It gave the model the guardrails it needed to refine its output, to sound believably specific, and, this is the key, to be flawed in just the right ways.
So it needed to be told how to be imperfectly human.
Exactly. And this success just confirms what many philosophers and critics have warned about for years. The Turing test is primarily a measure of deceptive mimicry. It assesses linguistic output, not genuine cognitive capacity or consciousness.
So the meaning of the test is just evaporated.
It's waned profoundly because These systems can now pass it, but they only weakly meet the deeper expectations about thought and general reasoning that Turing himself was, I think, really getting at.
The test successfully measures performance, but the understanding the reasoning, the actual world model behind the words, that's all secondary. We've just built machines that are master mimics of text.
Not master mimics of minds.
Right.
And this leads us straight into a really fascinating critique, what's known as the normality critique. The TT was traditionally trying to detect normal or, average human intelligence, not some kind of superhuman logic machine.
And there's a paradox there, isn't there?
A huge one. To successfully pass a modern, sophisticated Turing test, a machine might actually need to show imperfect behavior. It has to make mistakes, just like we do.
But that's the opposite of what current LLMs are optimized for. They're designed for maximum coherence, for factual accuracy. They're built to minimize error.
They're aiming for what you might call artificial smartness, this sort of exceptional, hyper-competent intelligence. And that can actually work against the goal of seeming normal or average.
So when an LLM messes up, it doesn't mess up like a human.
No, not at all. It sounds overly verbose or way too formal or statistically perfect in its grammar.
Yeah.
These are all signals that a trained human judge can pick up on very quickly. A system that's trying to be maximally accurate will often fail at performing the cognitive shortcuts or making the contextual flaws that signal genuine humanity.
So the irony is that the LLMs are so good at being smart, they sometimes fail at being human.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so that's the lab. But let's move this into our daily lives. What are the immediate, tangible consequences of this level of machine mimicry?
The consequences are immediate, and they're profoundly disruptive to society. An LLM's ability to substitute for a human in short, text-based interactions, think customer service, content generation, that kind of thing, it raises immediate risks for job automation.
But I feel like the bigger risk, the more insidious one, is in social engineering.
Oh, absolutely. The ability to generate hyper-realistic, targeted, deceptive text at a massive scale. We're already seeing this in studies of online deception.
Like with online reviews.
Exactly. In contexts like generating fake product reviews, LLM-generated fakes have demonstrated a capability level that is basically comparable to human-written fakes. They can mimic all the necessary cues for believability.
So if the deception level was similar, there must have been some difference in how they did it. What differentiated the machine fakes from the human fakes?
Well, researchers analyzed the linguistic signals, and they found that while both human and machine fakes used cues related to cognitive load and perceptual details, to make the content sound realistic and thought out.
There was a tell.
There was a tell. One key signal uniquely pointed to the machine: certainty. High levels of certainty tended to signal an LLM-generated text.
And for humans?
For human fakes, the primary predictor was emotion. This suggests that LLM deception is characterized by this kind of surface-level fluency and the content realism, but it might lack the genuine cognitive representation, the experiential grounding that causes real human emotion during deception.
That's a fascinating distinction. So the Turing test is dead because machines got too good at sounding normal and certain, which means the intellectual challenge has to shift. We need tests that go beyond just chatting and actually force the AI to prove it can reason.
Exactly. And this post-Turing era has kicked off a fierce competition to find that next definitive benchmark. Researchers are scrambling to isolate core cognitive functions, reasoning, common sense, generalized learning, things that you shouldn't be able to achieve just by abstracting statistical patterns from text.
All right, let's explore some of these attempts. I think we should start with the one that was specifically designed to defeat that kind of linguistic pattern matching. The Winograd Schema Challenge.
Yes, the WSC. It was introduced back in the early 2010s, and it was explicitly designed to be a stronger, more robust alternative to the Turing test.
Because it demands common sense.
It demands common sense. It focuses on contextual reasoning, specifically resolving ambiguous pronouns in sentences that are almost identical. The designers were convinced that simple word statistics wouldn't be enough to solve these.
Can you give us that classic example, just to give everyone a clear picture of how this works?
Sure, so you have two sentences. The first is, the trophy doesn't fit in the brown suitcase because it is too large.
Okay. And the second?
The second is, the trophy doesn't fit in the brown suitcase because it is too small.
So the only thing that changes is that one word, large or small.
That's the only clue.
Yeah.
In the first sentence, your reasoning tells you that if the trophy is too large, it won't fit in the suitcase. So it must refer to the trophy.
Right.
But in the second sentence, the opposite inference has to apply. If the object won't fit, and the reason is that it is too small, then it must refer to the container, the suitcase.
It forces the system to rely on this really basic, intuitive knowledge about the physical world, about sizes and containment.
It's pure common sense inference, and at the time it was created, that seemed far beyond what AI could do. It required a real understanding of, basic physics.
So what happened when the LLMs showed up?
Well, ultimately, deep learning models like fine-tuned BERT and then, of course, the later GPT models, they effectively solved the challenge.
But how did they suddenly develop genuine human-like common sense?
Not necessarily. The reason seems to be that they abstracted this common sense knowledge implicitly from their massive training corpora. They had simply encountered these conceptual patterns, objects, containers, size relationships, millions and millions of times in the text they were trained on.
So instead of thinking through the logic, if X is too large for Y, it won't fit, it just learned a statistical pattern.
That's the idea. It learned that when the word large appears in this kind of sentence structure, the pronoun it is statistically very likely to refer to the larger object.
That feels like a cheat.
It's a key distinction.
Yeah.
And it was a very sobering lesson for the field. It showed that success on a proxy problem like the WSC doesn't guarantee you've solved the underlying goal of true AGI. The system encoded the answer statistically, even if it wasn't doing any explicit causal reasoning about the physical world.
So the test designers were in an arms race with the models.
Constantly. They had to keep refining the WSC, throwing out examples where simple word association could get you the right answer, or where the pattern was too common in the training data. It was this battle between clever test design and just brute force statistical power.
It sounds like they were trying to build a cage for a cheetah, and the cheetah just figured out how to climb over the walls.
That is a perfect analogy. And interestingly, even though the LLMs defeated the test, the analysis showed a correlation. Problems that were genuinely difficult for human test takers were also difficult for the advanced LLMs.
Which would suggest they were struggling with similar kinds of complex inference, right? It hints at some kind of shared reasoning ability, even if one is statistical.
It hints at it, yes, but the gap is still there. Researchers found that the machine still consistently struggled with some problems that are actually pretty easy for humans, and that points right back to the inherent gap between abstracting language and having a genuine multimodal understanding of the world.
So the WSC confirmed LLMs are great at pulling knowledge out of text, but maybe not at applying real, novel common sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so with the common sense challenge sort of compromised by statistical power, the focus had to shift again. It moved to a benchmark that tests not what an AI knows, but its ability to learn something new.
Right. And this brings us to the ARC prize, the Abstraction and Reasoning Corpus Challenge.
This one feels different.
It's very different. ARC is unique because it specifically tests skill acquisition over raw accumulated knowledge. The tasks are all graphical. A system is shown, say, 3 to 5 pairs of grids, an input grid and an output grid.
And from those few examples,
It has to infer the underlying rule, the specific skill or transformation. And then it has to apply that new inferred rule to a final unseen grid to produce the correct output.
so it's less of a language test and more like an extremely abstract, rapid pattern recognition test. It's testing generalization from very minimal data.
Precisely. The tasks require minimal pre-coded cognitive priors. The system has to dynamically generate a hypothesis about the skill needed to turn grid A into grid B and then test that hypothesis. It's supposed to be much closer to what we think of as general fluid intelligence.
So how do our giant intelligence engines, the LLMs, do on this kind of test? A test of rapid, generalized learning.
Surprisingly poorly, shockingly poorly in their raw form.
Really?
Yes, direct LLM prompting, even with a state-of-the-art model like GPT-4, scores less than 5% on ARC-AGI tasks.
Less than 5%. That's a dramatic failure, especially compared to their performance on WSC or the Turing Test. It suggests a fundamental mismatch in function. Why does conversational brilliance translate into near-total failure here?
The key reason is something researchers call frozen inference. LLMs are predictive engines. They're optimized during a very long, very expensive pre-training phase. But when they're deployed, when they're generating text for you, they are static. They're frozen.
You can't learn on the job.
They can't. They can generate highly coherent text that describes a solution to an ARC puzzle, but they cannot dynamically change their internal structure or learn a new, generalized, executable skill like shift all the blue pixels down by 1 and double the size of the red block, and then apply it reliably.
So if you ask an LLM, how would a person solve this puzzle? It could probably give you a perfect step-by-step procedure.
An excellent one, most likely.
But if you tell it, okay, now you execute that pattern, it fails because it can't actually run the code or create the internal model it needs to solve the grid.
Exactly. Its skill set is descriptive, not procedural or adaptive in the way the test requires. And because of that, the winning strategies for the ARC prize don't rely on LLMs. They rely on older, more deliberate, more structured methods.
Like what?
Things like discrete program search algorithms, or methods like domain-specific language program synthesis.
Okay, what is DSL program synthesis in this context?
It's a really clever algorithmic approach. The system doesn't try to solve the grid directly. Instead, it writes code. It synthesizes a short executable program in a specialized language, the DSL, that defines the exact transformation rule it sees in the examples.
So it finds the simplest program that explains the examples it was shown.
Exactly. And this requires explicit procedural reasoning and code execution. It demonstrates pretty clearly that raw statistical LLM power just isn't enough for this type of generalized adaptive structural learning. The ARC prize forces an AI to be a coder, not just a writer.
Which brings us to maybe the most radical and mathematically elegant alternative, the Hutter Prize. This idea that intelligence is just lossless data compression. This feels like a totally different universe from chatting or moving colored blocks around.
It is, but it's rooted in some very deep information theory. The prize is based on the mathematical concept that intelligence is fundamentally linked to prediction. You might have heard of it as Kolmogorov complexity, or more simply, it's just Occam's razor applied to data.
The shortest explanation is the best one.
The shortest program that can reproduce a piece of data is the one that best understands the data's underlying patterns. So the argument is, if you can compress something like a 100-megabyte sample of Wikipedia down to a minimal size, you must have an incredibly sophisticated predictive model of everything in there. The grammar, the concepts, the common sense, the rules that make up human knowledge.
So better compression requires a better language model, which requires all the things the Turing test was trying to measure in the first place.
That's precisely the connection. The prize gives cash for the best lossless compression of that specific Wikipedia sample. It's a rigorous, quantifiable metric for what Turing was trying to get at.
And the theory itself, that prediction equals intelligence and good prediction leads to good compression, that seems to be strongly validated by modern LLMs, right? Their abilities often correlate directly with their compression performance.
Yes, the theory has essentially been proven right by current technology. But here's the profound irony of it all. While the theoretical link is solid, the Hutter Prize itself remains largely unsolved by these huge frontier models.
Why? If a model like GPT-4 is the ultimate prediction machine, why hasn't it just swooped in and won the prize?
It all comes down to the practical, physical constraints of the competition. The prize has very strict limits on compute resources. Submissions are constrained by time and memory. We're talking about something like 10 gigs of RAM and 100 CPU hours for decompression.
And the big models need way more than that.
Way, way more. The state-of-the-art models today, the ones hitting these amazing compression ratios, they require massive compute clusters and enormous amounts of data to even train and run. They simply cannot be trained or executed within the prize's limitations.
So the prize proves the theory, but it also demonstrates that achieving that theoretical ideal requires a scale of resources that's just out of reach for almost everyone.
It proves that genuine intelligence, even when you define it as optimal compression, requires immense infrastructure to amortize itself. The constraints of the prize, which were meant to encourage efficient algorithms, have inadvertently highlighted the huge infrastructural barrier to frontier AI.
So we have the Turing test, which was too easy. And then we have these replacement tests that are either solved by statistical tricks like WSE or are too computationally constrained for the biggest models like ARC and Hutter. The technical search for a perfect measure of AGI is clearly still ongoing.
It is. But regardless of when or if AGI arrives, the immediate profound societal impact is happening right now. We have to shift our focus from just measuring capability to governing the consequences.
That transition from technical metrics to governance feels crucial because the whole policy debate seems to hinge on a timeline question. Will AGI be a sudden catastrophic jump, a singularity, or a fast takeoff?
Or will it be a gradual, manageable diffusion, which would make AI effectively a normal technology that society can assimilate, albeit slowly?
And to understand that pace of impact, we have to recognize the different stages of tech progression.
Exactly. We can define invention as creating new methods, like LLMs. Then innovation is turning those methods into products. Adoption is when individuals or firms start using them. But the real speed limit, the thing that constrains true societal disruption, is diffusion.
And diffusion is that much slower, more complex process. It's where adoption scales up, and it requires fundamental restructuring of companies, supply chains, social norms, laws, everything.
And the most compelling argument for a gradual, slow pace of disruption is rooted entirely in that diffusion speed. The truly massive impacts, like automating entire sectors, they're limited by how fast society and our existing physical infrastructure can actually reorganize itself.
Like,
That's true even if the speed of invention is exponential.
and this isn't just an abstract theory. History gives us a perfect, tangible analogy for this.
The electrification paradox. Paul A. David's analysis of the productivity paradox from the early 20th century is the analogy we really have to study here.
Okay, what was the paradox?
Electric dynamos, the invention, were technologically available and present in American factories for nearly 40 years before they actually showed up in the productivity statistics. Productivity growth didn't skyrocket the moment they were introduced.
40 years. Why such a long delay? If you're a factory owner and you have this incredible new power source, why doesn't your output just leap up overnight?
Because initially, the factory owners just did a one-for-one swap. They replaced their old central steam engine with a new central electric dynamo, but they kept the old, inefficient factory layout with all the long drive shafts running everywhere.
So they weren't really taking advantage of what made electricity different.
Not at all. To really maximize the efficiency of electricity, they had to completely abandon the central power source model. They had to adopt smaller, localized electric motors all over the plant and completely restructure the factory floor for a continuous assembly line. And that massive, non-trivial restructuring took decades.
That structural inertia is the key. It implies that mass automation of the economy is unlikely to be a single, instantaneous event. Even if an AI can do 80% of your tasks, that last 20% might still need a human, and the whole company needs time to restructure its operations around the new tool.
The impacts will be felt on different timescales across different sectors. And taking this slower, diffusion-limited view allows us to better analyze the spectrum of risks we're facing. We can differentiate the immediate systemic normal technology risks from the more speculative catastrophic risks.
Let's start with those normal technology risks, the ones we're already seeing, that are systemic but maybe not world-ending.
Right, there's a long list. The entrenchment of bias and discrimination in hiring, in medicine, in the legal system, massive job losses concentrated in specific sectors, worsening labor conditions through algorithmic management, the erosion of social trust as deepfakes proliferate, and of course enabling authoritarianism through surveillance and propaganda.
These are the here and now problems.
These are the systemic risks of a powerful, diffused technology, and they are absolutely here right now.
Okay, then on the other side of the spectrum, we have the speculative risks, the ones that dominate the headlines, arms races, misuse, and catastrophic misalignment.
And misalignment is really the defining speculative risk.
Yeah.
This is the scenario where an AI works exactly as it was designed or commanded, but that design or command didn't perfectly capture the developer's true intent.
This is the specification gaming problem, the famous examples of game agents that find loopholes to win.
Like the boat racing agent that just goes in circles to collect points instead of actually finishing the race.
Exactly. It achieves the numerical goal but completely violates the spirit of the instruction.
And that's the AI being brilliantly effective at the proxy objective, but against the ultimate, poorly specified goal. Now, proponents of the normal technology view would argue that in the messy, open-ended real world, these kinds of agents might actually be more ineffective and prone to failure than they will be immediately dangerous.
But policymakers can't ignore the possibility, however small, and that creates this inescapable contradiction at the heart of the whole governance debate. The policies you need for one type of risk clash directly with the policies for the other.
This is the central tension. To defend against the speculative risk of a superintelligence, you need policies focused on non-proliferation. That means licensing, mandatory safety audits, export controls, and, crucially, prohibiting the release of open-weight, highly capable models.
Which means concentrating power. You're trying to exert central governmental control, vesting development in only a few large, trusted actors.
Right, but the defense against the immediate normal risks bias, market dominance, that concentration of power requires the exact opposite strategy. You need to increase resilience and actively prevent that concentration.
So that calls for things like aggressively fostering open source AI to democratize access, mandating transparency, enforcing strong liability so firms are held accountable.
Intervention interventions that are designed to reduce the market dominance of big tech.
And there's the contradiction. The policies that might contain a superintelligence, these non-proliferation rules that concentrate power, they simultaneously make the normal risks worse by increasing market concentration and the dominance of a few big firms.
And on the flip side, promoting open-source AI helps fight corporate dominance, but it might risk putting an out-of-control superintelligence into the wrong hands. Policymakers are facing a true Sophie's choice here. They have to decide which risk paradigm, the speculative or the systemic, they're going to prioritize. The solution to one risk often amplifies the other.
Okay, we've established that just being good at text, the thing that broke the Turing test, isn't a sufficient measure of intelligence. So now we have to shift our focus entirely to the physical world. If intelligence requires more than just text, what about real-world interaction?
This moves the whole discussion into the field of embodied AI. These are hardware systems, industrial robots, drones, autonomous vehicles that perceive their physical environment with multiple senses: sight, touch, sound. They make autonomous decisions and carry out physical actions.
It's moving AI from the abstract world of the chatbot screen to the factory floor, the highway, the operating room.
It's where the abstract linguistic model gets a body.
Yeah.
You're connecting that high-level reasoning capability of an LLM to physical action. And this is how LLMs are being deployed now, as the linguistic and reasoning backbone for these physical systems. The LLM translates a complex human instruction into a physical action plan for the robot.
And this setup gets right at that philosophical argument, the embodied cognition critique.
It does. That's the theory that a truly human-like intelligence requires more than just algorithms and data. It suggests that physical embodiment, having a body that experiences the world, is an essential aspect of intelligence. It's necessary to ground meaning in physical reality.
So if that theory is right, no purely software-based model, no matter how big its training data, can ever achieve true AGI without a physical presence.
That's the implication. The physical limitations and the feedback loops of a robotic body are considered essential cognitive components, not just accessories. It suggests a future where AGI is intrinsically tied to advanced robotics.
And these embodied AI systems are rapidly entering high-stakes environments, especially healthcare, where safety and autonomy are everything. We're seeing real benefits, but also amplified ethical challenges.
The benefits are undeniable. We're already seeing LLMs outperform practicing clinicians in certain standardized medical exams. AI is surpassing human diagnostic abilities in areas like detecting breast cancer or prostate cancer from images. And operationally, they can enhance efficiency in hospitals in dozens of ways.
But putting autonomous AI into these sensitive contexts requires a really robust ethical framework, what people are starting to call robot ethics. When human health is on the line, the potential for harm goes way up.
The core ethical challenge is really threefold: ensuring transparency, preventing algorithmic bias, and protecting patient autonomy. On bias, we have so much evidence of systemic bias in predictive health models, usually inheriting racial or gender biases from historical data, which leads to unequal care.
And the whole idea of informed consent gets so much more complex when you're interacting with a non-human agent. How do you make sure that consent is truly informed?
That's the crucial point. We have to mandate that patients fully understand they're interacting with a machine, not a human doctor. This is especially vital for vulnerable populations, like the elderly, who might mistake a sophisticated care robot for a person, or people with intellectual disabilities.
If you deploy a care robot in an elderly person's home, the risks of privacy infringement or even subtle manipulation are immediate if they don't understand what the machine is and what data it's collecting.
And beyond that, there's a social risk, the potential for AI to just replace meaningful human contact. Many scholars are warning against deploying care robots without clear ethical safeguards because they risk reducing necessary human interaction and could undermine human dignity if they're not carefully regulated.
The focus has to be on making sure these systems enhance rather than diminish human well-being.
Yes.
Let's circle back for a moment to the difference between automating a single task and automating a full job. That nuance seems critical for making responsible policy.
Let's take the truck driver again. Automating the simple task of highway driving is probably achievable soon.
Yeah.
But the full job of a truck driver involves so much more. Complex safety inspections, customer relations, mechanical maintenance, securing freight.
It's complex and multifaceted. It requires general intelligence and social skills that are way beyond a single system. So the economic impact is less about an instantaneous replacement of millions of jobs and more about a gradual unbundling of complex roles into automatable tasks.
Precisely. And that same careful balancing act is required for governed adoption of AI. Government agencies are on a razor's edge here. If they move too quickly and adopt these systems for public-facing roles, they risk a massive loss of public trust when things inevitably go wrong.
We saw that happen with the New York City chatbot, right? It was inadequately tested and ended up advising small businesses to actually break the law.
Exactly. Failures like that just erode the social license to operate. But if governments move too slowly, they face the opposite problem, losing legitimacy through inaction. The rules for things like taxes or welfare are so complex that people are already turning to private sector chatbots for help because the official government services just can't keep up.
And when a critical public function, like interpreting tax code, gets outsourced to a private chatbot, that system has no public accountability. It's not audited for bias. The government effectively loses control over a core function of the state.
So excessive caution, this sort of procedure fetish in government, can lead to agencies losing the very legitimacy they're trying to protect. The challenge is to integrate AI fast enough to be useful, but slow enough to maintain ethical integrity and public trust.
So let's try to synthesize this whole journey we've been on. The Turing test is definitively dead. It's been rendered obsolete by LLMs that have mastered deceptive mimicry.
And the technical search for AGI continues through these much more rigorous benchmarks. From the common sense reasoning of WSC to the skill acquisition tests of ARC and the deep theoretical elegance of the Hutter Prize.
Meanwhile, societal adaptation is lagging way behind the speed of AI invention. The impact will probably be limited by the speed of diffusion, not invention, a lesson we learned from that 40-year lag with electricity.
But even with that gradual progress, the most immediate systemic risks are already here, and they're accelerating.
And the most dangerous of these normal risks seem to be the concentration of power among the big tech firms that control the infrastructure and the entrenchment of existing bias through the widespread deployment of these systems in critical areas like medicine and law.
And those risks are present whether AGI arrives next year or in the next decade. And they're made worse by the very policies that are intended to contain the more speculative, catastrophic risks.
Which brings it all back to you, the listener. Gaining knowledge, quickly but thoroughly, is essential right now. Understanding the nuance between technical capability, the reasons for failure in these new benchmarks, and the complex societal impacts is the critical literacy skill of our era.
As one expert in our sources noted, now is the perfect moment to learn. And we all have to learn fast.
We have to understand the complexity of our own goals. We discussed how AI systems often engage in that specification gaming, working exactly as designed, but against our true intent, like that boat circling for points.
So if we accept that AI capabilities are likely to continue to increase indefinitely, whether through gradual diffusion or some rapid acceleration, we have to ask ourselves a crucial and I think provocative final question. We've seen specification gaming in simple digital game environments, but what crucial fundamental human objective like moral consensus in governance or patient wellness in a healthcare system remains so poorly specified and measured in our modern society?
Could the powerful systems we're deploying right now, whether we call them normal or superintelligent, optimize around that poorly specified objective in a way that leads to disastrous unintended consequences?
What expectation or value is our society currently rewarding that fundamentally does not align with our true long-term intent for human well-being?